Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar titled How to Increase Engagement and Build Trust with Remote Teams. My name is David Rice. As always, I'm your host, and I'm also the editor of the HR Exchange Network. Before we get right into everything today, just a couple of quick reminders as usual. Should you encounter any technical issues, feel free to use the Q&A widget. It's like in the bottom left-hand portion of your screen there. You can submit any questions you have to me, and I will do the best that I can to help you square those away so that you get back on track. It's also the same place where if you have a question about the content of today's session, you can submit questions in that widget to our speaker. We'll do the best that we can to get to those throughout the presentation or at the end during the Q&A portion. We do have the group chat live for today's session. So there's going to be some questions that are asked that are kind of open-ended, and we want to hear your thoughts and answers on that. And it looks like if it's not already up on your screen, there will be a blue square with two little chat bubbles in it. Just click on that. The group chat should pop right up, and you can put in all your answers to the questions there. As well as have any conversations. We'll be looking at that and conversing around some of these topics. So be on the lookout for that. As always, you can earn SHRM credit for today's presentation. Details about how to redeem those credits will go out after the session has concluded, so be on the lookout for that as well. All right, obviously this is a very timely topic. Remote teams, I think it's become very prevalent, and I'm hearing a lot of folks say that at the very least there will be hybrid going forward, and so there's going to be a lot more talk about engaging remote teams. And so to lead us in a conversation around this, we're joined by Rebecca Hathaway. She is the Director of Employee Experience at Tango Card. So Rebecca, welcome.
Thank you. Welcome. Good afternoon for some of you. Good morning for some of you. Thank you so much for coming today. As David mentions, we're going to talk about building trust and keeping remote employees engaged. Today, we're going to talk a lot about the technologies that we as Tango Card use to keep that engagement up and keeping people connected, again, through technology. I will say, disclosure up front, I am not affiliated with any of these companies aside from Tango Card. I am a user of their tools, but I am not affiliated with them in any other way. So we're going to talk about those tools, and we are going to pause periodically throughout this to have a discussion on those tools, to ask questions, to allow you to ask questions, to make this more conversational. So you don't need to save your questions till the end. I think I have 3 or 4 question decks throughout this slide deck. So we've got a lot of opportunity to have a really good dialogue here. And with that, we will go ahead and get started on building trust on remote teams. So according to a recent study by Tech Republic, I think this study came out last month, 1 in 3 employees said they would quit if work from home ends. Now, we don't know what that means for each employee. Does that mean flexibility? Does that mean fully remote, fully in office? But that's a big number. That is substantial. That is a huge amount of your workforce. So are you ready to lose 1/3 of your workforce if you're not ready to be remote? But if you are remote, how do you keep those folks engaged? What tools can you use? What types of technologies can you use to keep people talking, chatting, connected throughout the day? If we're going into this hybrid or remote space. One of the things that we're doing at Tango Card is calling our program a choice first program. So we're not going to be fully remote. We're not going to be fully in office. We're not even calling it a hybrid model. Part of our brand is leading with choice and giving our clients, our customers, our consumers a choice. So we're doing that for our employees. We basically are saying we're trusting you to make the choice that's right for you when it comes to where you work. You know how you work. Some people really need that office environment to thrive, so we're going to continue to let those folks come to the office once it's safe to do so. And for some folks, they don't need to be in the office to thrive. They're doing just fine with their job from home. They want to keep it that way. But there's flexibility here as well. So kind of giving them that option. And since March 3rd of last year, which is when we sent everybody home, we've hired 67 fully remote employees. For a company of 192 folks, that's a lot. That's a lot of our employee base hired in a fully remote capacity. They've never seen an office. And a lot of those folks are also in different places. They're not necessarily located near one of our offices. And part of this role was also a chief people officer. We hired an executive in a fully remote space who started last week. So it's been a really interesting trajectory to see that space and that growth. And we recently did a survey of what's going to happen when people come back, what their choices are going to be, what they look like. And 84% of our employees have chosen to work from home primarily, and 16 have chosen to work from an office. Now, those folks can come into an office if they're fully remote. If they want to be in the office for the day, they'll book a desk, just like a hotel desk system. And of course, those employees who are working in the office are not required to be in the office every day. If they need to stay home for whatever reason that day, that's totally fine as well. But they have benefits and options based on where their primary desk space is. So we have this primary option, but knowing that you can flex either way depending on the situation that works for you. And you can change that at any time. If you're working from home and you realize that is just not working for you, you really want to come back, you can make that choice to say, hey, I'm actually going to make my office primary in the workspace. Or if the opposite is true, you're finding that you're not going into the office very often, the commute was worse than you thought, it's just not working, you can choose to say, actually, I'm not going to work from the office, I'm going to work primarily remote and come in occasionally. Either option is fine for us. And I think what we're going to see in this hybrid model that a lot of other companies are choosing is that there's going to be a lot of that. And I think companies that do not get on that train early are going to be in trouble a little bit when it comes to hiring, because that's going to be a huge point for candidates. It's going to be a benefit. It's going to be a piece of the culture that they look for is, do you trust me to work from home? And next up, so talking about keeping those folks engaged, because I know there's a lot of concern of what happens with all of these people that have never met. They don't know anybody. They've never seen photos. They've never seen people. And what does that feel like? And do you lose your culture? And so we're utilizing the tools that we already have to push engagement and push connection a little bit further than we normally would have. So we use Namely as our HR and payroll tool. And of course, just like a lot of other HR platforms now, it has a news feed, very similar to a social media platform. I know ADP either has one or is looking at one. A lot of other payroll and HR systems are starting to have them now. And so we've encouraged people to use them, to see what's happening outside of their teams, to look at hires, to look at people who are having anniversaries. And what we've done is actually connected this to celebrating wins with our internal product, which we'll talk about in a moment as well, to give those folks a tangible piece as well as a news feed. So what's happening here is if somebody congratulates someone in a news feed, or if they have a work anniversary, they're actually getting a Tango card reward link, which is a digital gift card catalog link for every single thing that's happening in here. So it's encouraging use, it's encouraging connection, and it's actually getting people into your HR platform, which I know I'm talking to a lot of HR professionals here, and we all know that sometimes it's hard to get folks to go into the HR tool, whatever that is, keep their stuff updated, what have you. And this is a great way to do that. If there's a little bit more engagement, it becomes a social piece as well as just a piece for work. So I know that was pretty quick, but any questions about Namely or using your HR system as a way to keep people engaged beyond just what do I do in this system for work? Because we all have obviously necessary reasons to be in those HR tools.
It's interesting. One of the things I was going to ask you about, Rebecca, is, Namely, I know that they have quite a robust analytics offering. And then I know that, all your other systems are collecting data as well. So can you talk about how that all integrates and what you all are able to kind of pull from that to see kind of some insights about the employee experience and how people are engaging?
Yeah. So in Namely, I can pull a report that is basically an activity report, who's doing what in the tool. And my guess is most other companies that have a function like this have that ability. So you can see kind of your active users, the people who are getting added a lot. and you can see what's kind of going on in that space. We haven't really done much with that data just yet, other than to see how many interactions we're having per day. And within Namely, that's about 10. So 190 people, 10 interactions on a daily basis. It's not exactly perfect, but I think that's probably more than what we were seeing in the tool prior. And again, you can see the analytics of traffic, who's coming into Namely, and we have noticed an uptick in traffic of people just going in there more. I don't know what they're doing necessarily in there, but I can see that people are engaging with the tool more. And if they're engaging with the tool more, they're likely engaging with coworkers more. They're going to finding org charts, they're finding people's photos, they're figuring out what somebody's title is. Even if that's little things, it's getting them to the tool by enticing them with something that's a little more interesting than maybe what they would normally be in that tool for, like PTO requests and address updates.
All right, we do have some questions coming into the Q&A around this, and I want to encourage everybody to make sure you're using the group chat. So the group chat feature is where you can kind of do some comments on these specific open-ended questions, but that'll be the 2 chat bubbles down along the menu bar. But one of the questions was, who or how often do you update the digital newsletter?
We don't actually have a digital newsletter just yet. Oh. We let the news feed kind of be in that space. It is something that we're looking at because we were finding people that didn't necessarily read the digital newsletter, but we are updating our internal blog more often, and then pushing those notifications to something like Namely. But we're pulling that data from Namely into these blog posts, and we're going to start publishing them a little bit more. We're finding people were a little overloaded with the newsletters.
Gotcha. Yeah, I get about 50 of them a day. So, so we'll just do one more here. It says, do you find it necessary to monitor the content of the messages or set rules around those messages? Any concerns of misuse there?
That's a good one. I have not found that to be a concern. And I think the reason is it is public to everyone. So if you're going to put that in there, if you're going to put content in there, your boss is going to see it, your boss's boss, the CEO is going to see it. So I think there's a little bit of self-regulation that happens there. Every now and then I have asked people to maybe not go above and beyond with like the birthday wishes, for example, because it'll just clog the news feed. And basically just saying, hey, if there is an issue or if there's a message that you think that you like, you can still have that reaction to it, right? There's a like button, there's a respond with an emoji button, things like that, just like any other feed. So you're not having to do that. I think that's the biggest issue that we've ever seen is people saying, oh my gosh, happy birthday. And then all of it is just happy birthday to like 2 people for like 3 days straight. So we've only seen that, but we haven't seen any sort of inappropriate content or anything that we would consider to be something we need to censor. But again, I think a lot of that comes down to the very public nature. You can't post anonymously there. It has to be, it's attached to your name. So people are a little bit more cognizant, I think, of what they're putting in there.
Awesome. Now, we did have a question come in the group chat from Tilandria. It says, does the Namely platform take the place of your intranet? How does it intersect with your org's intranet, basically?
Ooh, it does not take the place of our intranet. We use Confluence, Atlassian as our internal communication tool primarily. So Namely is what I tell people, it's the source for all things HR. So if you can't find it on Confluence, it should be in Namely and vice versa. But they are starting to see a little bit more interconnectivity, especially with regards to things like training. And so I tell employees it's the source of truth for HR. If it's not necessarily HR related, you may have to find it externally on our intranet, but it's definitely going to be in that space of, if it's HR related, it is likely in Namely somewhere.
All right. Well, I don't see any other questions around Namely, so I'll get out of your way and let you move on to the next one.
That's great. So the next tool is, we use Slack, but any sort of instant messaging platform that you have, whether that's Microsoft Teams, High Five, anything where you're connecting your employees with a chat platform. And this is where I know a lot of questions are going to come up around content again. What we've done in Slack is, of course, everybody's using it for instant messaging. They're using it for group purposes. You've got your, debrief teams and this team and that team, but really allowing folks a place to have conversations that aren't necessarily work related. And so we've introduced several different Slack channels that are mostly for fun. We used to have a dog friendly office. So we have a cute office dogs channel where everybody posts daily pictures of what their dog is doing that day. Great way to break up the day. Or having groups related to employee resource groups, something that we're looking at in the future, or little things like we have a group of people who really like board games. So they have a game Slack channel where they're able to chat, and it replaces some of those conversations that happen in the workplace that are not necessarily work related, but aren't necessarily inappropriate, right? You want to chat about movies or music or games and connect with your coworkers, really encouraging folks to use that as an outlet for something and to chat and make those connections. And it's going to allow people to meet with people they haven't met. Another piece that we've really leaned into with Slack is a kudos channel. So talking about Namely again for a moment, there was that news feed, that way to say, I appreciate you, I thank you, to at somebody for doing something really great. We've integrated this into Slack as well. And so we have a TC Kudos channel that lets employees say a public thank you to their team members. And again, we've integrated this with our tool, RG Integrate, that allows people to send those folks that they're thanking or that they're giving their kudos to a $10 gift card, in addition to this public thank you that's going on this Slack channel. And that's something that we'll talk about a little heavier in a moment, but really having, again, a public place for people to say a public thank you to somebody who's gone above and beyond. Maybe they're not on the same team. Maybe they never interacted before, and it gives them the opportunity to connect and really feel appreciated, even if it wasn't that big of a deal to them. Maybe it's a big deal to somebody, and having that public space for thanking folks that is visible to everybody in the company. Again, the whole company can see everything. And we've connected this to Namely as well as our HR tool, our RG tool, to integrate it so that they get a gift card, but it also goes to Namely to double check that person is active and that there's no reporting chain structure. So there's no perceived favoritism because you can't give those gift cards or anything to people that are in your direct line of reports. So this is something that we really started doing recently, but we've seen a huge uptick. We have about 125 individual messages of thanks and kudos per month. So out of 190 employees, pretty significant. Any questions about using Slack or other instant messaging tools and ways that you can actually increase your employee connectivity and engagement through those tools?
Yeah. So I think this question is kind of, how have you been able to use this to build trust, so to speak?
Yes. So when we're onboarding new folks, one of the first things we do is we give them our Slack directory and our Slack library to say, here's all the channels that we have. Feel free to join whatever you want. Super cool. But also here's where you can go to see a history of Tango card. And one of the things that we've seen with the TC Kudos channel, I do meet with all of our employees at their 90-day point to see how they're doing. And one of the things they've said is it's really nice to feel that connection. Even if I'm not part of the team yet, I can see that people trust each other. And so what you're doing there is creating a space for employees without interference from leadership. Employees all the time are, our leadership doesn't trust us, or leaders will say one thing and do another. So to see a peer-to-peer space that's not monitored, it's not we monitor it, of course, but it's not excessively censored, that doesn't have input, it's purely the employees thanking each other, is a really encouraging thing to see as a new hire, because you're feeling welcomed and you're feeling that connection already, even though you haven't necessarily been there for that long. And you can see coworkers' names, you'll start to see familiar faces in there. And really allowing folks to do that. And then it allows managers to go in and see, oh, somebody on my team received a kudos. Well, what'd they do? And you can see the thank you. You can see the public space where you as a manager get to see an interaction that you may not have known was there because it's created this. And so I'll use myself as an example. Recently, I didn't realize one of my recruiters had gone above and beyond to like reschedule an entire loop because somebody was sick. I had no idea. And I saw the kudos from somebody on that interview loop saying, thank you so much for, dropping everything and redoing this. And it was something that I didn't know she did. So to see that as her manager was something that I was then able to connect with her on and say, hey, I saw that you did this. Way to go. Way to build trust with an external team. And, acknowledge her as her manager, which I think is something that we don't always assume needs to happen, but is really engaging when we're not seeing each other in the workplace on a daily basis.
So there's some questions that come in. One of them was kind of around, do you find that, too many tools makes folks apprehension, kind of like it sort of dilutes the offering there. Maybe if there's a ton of tools, I think people are wondering, what percentage of employees are using this effectively? And the other piece of this that has kind of come out is around keeping people using the kudos system. So kind of, can you speak to those factors as well? Sorry.
Yeah. So with the first one, definitely site fatigue, right? Like you got to go to this site, you got to go to that site. And what we've done is we've worked with Workato to connect Namely and Slack together so that when somebody puts something in that Namely news feed, it goes to Slack. And when somebody puts something in that Slack news feed, it goes to Namely. So you're getting double the publicity, right? Double the thank you. And you only had to put it in one place. Which is a really, really great thing. Yes, you're not encouraging people to have to use like 18 different tools. Obviously, not every tool is going to interact well. But one of the things that we do now is whenever we get a new tool, the first thing we say is, does it integrate with Namely? And does it integrate with Slack? And if it doesn't integrate with those two things, we usually don't do it. And in this space of so many HR technologies and so many engagement platforms and wellness platforms and all these different tools, highly recommend getting a tool that meets your needs, but also one of your needs should probably be, does it talk to the systems that I already have? Because one of the things that we've done is make sure that all of these systems talk to each other. Because employees are not going to go to every single one. They're not going to always remember, oh, I got to go for this tool for this, and this tool for that. It's overwhelming. And also way more places for you to have to monitor as an HR professional. And I'm all about streamlining. If I can add somebody to one place and have them populate in 8 other places, I am all about that. And keeping it tight like that. As far as keeping people engaged with the Kudos platform, this is something that we haven't had to do much work on, so it's not going to be a great answer because people just have stayed engaged. Once we connected it to our RG Integrate, that was a really exciting time for us. Obviously, it's an internal product. It's something that we're really excited about. And once that happened, we did see an uptick just because people were excited about this product that they had worked on that launched internally. But I do find that when we've added folks to this platform and we've told them, hey, here's some basic guidelines, check it out, but there's no budget. That was also a very interesting point of you can send these $10 thank you gifts. They come from the company. They don't come from you. The company pays for them. And it's something that has really kept people engaged, I think, as well, to show that we're as a company putting our money where our mouth is, right? We're saying peer-to-peer engagement, thank each other, be a place of gratitude. Let's show that in more than just words. And it's not necessary, but it is a piece that I think adds a little bit more to it when you can say, oh, I basically sent this person a cup of coffee, right? You would do that in the office. You'd take them out for coffee or lunch or what have you. You're able to do that now in a different kind of way. So giving them that tangible piece at the end.
Now, when you say RG Integrate, you're referring to
Yes.
the rewards gateway feature that you guys have?
Yes, which we're actually going to talk about in just a moment. I know I've dropped it
Okay.
a couple times, and unfortunately, because they're all tied together, it becomes really interesting because we're talked about them all up until now. But yes, it is our internal product.
All
Um,
right. The one last question I had on the Slack thing,
yeah.
by integrating it with, namely, do you get do you get more analytics on how Slack is used kind of because of that?
Not necessarily,
Okay.
because it is a script through Workato. So we are
Okay.
able to pull that data from Namely, but it's not as complete as you would like. What's interesting
Okay.
is that it does come up with RG Integrate, which we'll talk about here in a second. There is an analytics feature there that oddly enough ends up being more robust and more helpful than the Namely feature for Slack. We're also
Okay.
a very Slack heavy organization. And I will say, that's the trend for a lot of places that are technology focused is email is the kind of archaic new tool or old tool, right? Everybody wants just have that conversation in Slack or in Teams or High Five or whatever chat tool you use. And it's interesting to see the types of things that used to be an email and are now in Slack. And I think that is an interesting future that we as HR need to be ready for, is to be willing to have conversations in Slack, and just know when to maybe push it to email, because sometimes it does need to get out of Slack as an informal space. But people are using Slack more and more as that way to stay connected. So really focusing on your chat system as you're doing a fully remote space is going to keep people more engaged.
All right.
All right. So moving on, and I see a lot of questions, so we'll definitely get to these as well a little bit later. So RG Integrate is our internal tool. So this is the part of the conversation where I say I am a part of Tango Card. The other tools I use, but I'm not part of. It allows you to give rewards via digital gift card catalogs to employees for a variety of things. One of the things we did in Namely was we set up a connection with our API and a script that actually pulls all of people's work anniversaries and sends them a gift card automatically on their work anniversary with a personalized message. This is huge. I know, again, I'm talking to HR professionals. I know we've all had that drawer of like Amazon and Visa gift cards that you give to people on their anniversaries, or you're doing it digitally, you're sending them something, you're pulling reports every month. This takes that piece out. And it's really been a fantastic thing that we've been able to see. And it's kept people engaged as well, right? Your anniversary comes around, it's on this page, it's public, everybody can see it. You got a $50 gift card and you didn't do anything. Aside from, obviously work for the last year, which is great. But nothing had to happen for those things to occur. And that increases the engagement that we see because nothing gets forgotten. And our folks are very in tune to those tools. And so when they see an anniversary, there's very much like a lot of dancing panda gifs and all sorts of crazy, excited emojis and gifs that happen as a result of these events. And it's really, it notifies the employee as well anytime these happen. So you're getting that notification, you're feeling the love, right? You're feeling the love from your peers, from the system. And we as HR folks had to do some setup, but no additional follow-up, which is really nice. We've also taken this tool into the Slack feature. And what happens with that kudos is when you send a thank you and you at somebody, they're automatically going to get a $10 gift card from this tool as well. That is funded by Tango Card. We don't charge employees for it. There's no limit. And I know the question's going to come up. We don't really have people abuse it, again, because it's public. Everybody can see everything that you send. Everybody can see why you sent it. And so it's kind of a self-monitoring system in that way. We've told people a couple very small guidelines, no back and forth. Like if you send one, you don't get to send one and then say thank you for sending a gift. Like that's not the intention. And that it should be real time. You should be able to send that card within the day and really justify why. And the justification could really just be, this person dropped what they were doing to help me with this problem and took 15 minutes of their day to explain something that they didn't need to explain to me, but they did. And giving the employees the trust to say, you can do this as many times as you feel like it's appropriate, is really showing them that, okay, we're putting this trust in you once more. And then they're taking that and building it within the peer network. So it's not just the leadership says we trust people. It's like, no, we trust you. We don't even have a budget for this tool. Be careful, be cognizant, but do what you want. And it's been a really fascinating thing to see in the pandemic, because we've noticed an increase in the amount of thank yous that people are sending, and it's keeping people connected, and it's keeping people engaged in a way that, we didn't even see in the office, because it's the only way to thank somebody. Instead of going over and doing that in person, you can do it with the tools that we've created and the ways that we've have linked them all together. And the reporting function that I spoke of earlier, that's where it really helps. That's where I pull my data, is from RG. I can pull reports to the beginning of time that show who sent what, how much it was for, and what the message is. And so I can see who our heavy senders are, who our heavy receivers are. I can send reports to managers to say, hey, so-and-so got like 15 thank yous this month. Should we talk about a raise or a promotion for this person if they're really performing this well, or at least give them some acknowledgement from you, to really use those tools to keep an eye on our employees in a positive light, to say, okay, we're seeing this, let's talk about what we can do to increase or to reward such positive behavior. Awesome. So that was RG Integrate. And again, that is our product. That is the one time I will say I am affiliated with this product and not just a user. I know we have a lot of questions, so let's dive in. What do we got?
All right. So we had a question come in about, cash awards and the public sector. That is not necessarily legal. So do you have any other suggestions for that arena?
So just taking the cash part out and doing some sort of a public acknowledgement, I think people don't realize can go a really long way, especially when your managers and your peers are seeing it, or connecting it to something else internally. Maybe it's, I've seen people do it with PTO, right? For every kudos you get a half day additional PTO that you can bank, or, something along those lines. Maybe it's an hour, whatever that looks like for you. Seen people do kind of a points system, almost like a wellness system, where you redeem those points from your kudos for a later item, to keep that cash part out of it, right? Because yes, obviously you can't always use that. There are limitations there. So getting creative and trying to find a way to link those thank yous to something, but even if you don't link them, acknowledging that a public thank you, a public acknowledgement of something that you did goes a really long way for folks. And especially when you consider things like the CEO, our CEO goes through that on like a weekly basis just to see what people are doing. And really encouraging your leadership to get involved, to look at that and to implement that in the discussions that they have, maybe pulling it into performance reviews and saying, hey, you got all of these kudos, and putting them in a performance review and really baking it into not just this one piece, but looking at it for the whole culture.
So I guess the next part of this question is, how does this differ for remote teams from, say, in-person teams? What is it about this that specifically will kind of drive that element of trust with a remote team?
So when you're in person, and I think I mentioned this before, you can see things like, people will go take somebody to coffee and they'll, say thank you that way, or they'll go say thank you to that person in person, right? There's a little bit more stuff that happens in person. But what we're seeing now is we have people across 14 different states, as well as being remote in their office locations. So we're seeing folks that may not ever see their coworkers also being able to use these tools. And it's making sure that those people, when you do return to an office, don't get forgotten. I think that's a big fear that's come up a lot, which is we hired this person, they've never met anybody. And when we go back to the office and they're not near an office, nobody's going to see them and they're going to forget who they are. This focuses on, are they in the payroll system? Because then you can do this. And really focusing on connecting people using the tools that you may already have in your arsenal, and really focusing on not just what happens in the workplace, in the office itself. There's a lot of space in what we're doing here and all of these tools to connect them and to keep these people connected. And I think we've relied very heavily on the office, of course, up until now, for those interactions to happen. And so how can you take interactions that happen in the office and move them into move them into a digital space, which Isa just reminded me really leads nicely into our next tool. So we will answer I know there's some other questions here. We'll definitely talk about the tax perspective in the end, because that's a really good one. But talking more about using tools for engagement, Donut is a Slack app, so you do have to have Slack for this, but I do know that there are alternatives for other chat functions. And just the concept of this tool, I think, is something worth considering if you don't have Slack, but you want to do something like this. It does two things, and it creates what it's calling a digital water cooler. And this is something that we got in the pandemic, and that I have had multiple people come tell me, please don't ever get rid of Donut, even in a post-pandemic world. This is my favorite thing. It's a fairly inexpensive app. And what it does is, on a regular cadence, whether that be once a week, twice a week, we use it every other day, it creates a topic for conversation for the day. And sometimes it's a question, sometimes it's a more open-ended question. I always use is a taco a sandwich question. It comes up every time. To encourage folks to just have a really nice, fun, silly dialogue that's not work related, that is, all their questions are very work appropriate. You never get into rough territory there, which is nice. But it encourages those conversations that we've all seen happen in the break room or next to the coffee pot of, I went on this vacation. Oh, you went on that vacation. They start talking about things, and becomes this really great way to connect people. So this is a way for a tool to do that for you. The second piece that it does, which I think is way more fascinating, and it would encourage folks to find a way to do if you can't use an app like this, is that it pairs participating employees together every 2 weeks for an informal, non-work related coffee date. And it looks at your schedule, it does all the work for you, and it's a random smattering of people. So if you're involved in it and if you're enrolled in it, you can do this. And there's no limit to how many people you can meet. And it's a really great way for especially new hires to reach out to people that they're not on their team, they probably don't interact, but they want to meet, without having to awkwardly say, hey, you look like an interesting human, want to have coffee. That can be weird. Nobody's going to say yes to that, but people might want that, and this replaces that. I do it every 2 weeks. It's really cool. And again, I don't think you necessarily need this app to do it, but it's a really great functionality to increase people's engagement with folks that are not on their team. And again, there's no formal topics. There's no, discussion of, this has to be work related. I actually encourage folks to not talk about work in those meetings. Any questions about that app or using the kind of concept there to increase engagement between peers?
Let's see here. The chat seems a bit quiet at the moment.
These are really interesting. Go ahead.
Sorry. Does Donut require someone to help facilitate, or is it automatic? This is from Nikki.
It's automatic. Once you set it up, it does everything. Took me about 30 minutes to set up for our company. And you can choose, maybe you want certain topics to be off limits, so you can actually choose to not have it discuss certain things. And then We linked it to Slack and Google Calendar, and I don't do any work. I check on the stats every once in a while, but that's pretty much it.
All right. So, in terms of some of the things that have gone on there, what have been just some of your favorites?
There was what's the most beautiful place you've seen? Upload a picture. That was really fun.
Oh,
Just to see people's vacation photos.
can't go wrong.
The food questions are always the most entertaining. What's your favorite type of egg and why? What's your favorite restaurant? What's your favorite food? What song have you had on repeat was a really interesting one lately. And, again, they're very light questions, but they open up a lot of interesting questions, commentary. Somebody took the songs one and I think was going to make a playlist of all of the songs that were there and share it with the company. So really and again, it's just keeping people chatting with each other in a way that's not necessarily related to work. So it's a cool tool.
What advice would you have? There are some folks who in the workplace, they're just not into interacting in a kind of personal way. So what kind of, advice would you have for, I don't know if there's a way to use these tools to engage those folks, or kind of how do you approach that?
So I don't think you necessarily need to force those folks to do it. I think it is really important for managers to know the types of people that they're working on their team. And if you have somebody on your team who's like, hey, I want to come in, I want to do my job, I want to do it well, and then I want to bounce for the day, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. We as a society have really pushed this idea that you have to be chatty and connected. And I mean, we're talking about it right now. But if somebody's doing well with their job, they're interacting in a professional and courteous manner, they don't necessarily need to be engaged in this way. And there's some folks that have opted out of these tools, and we've allowed for that. Donut is optional. I opt in everybody when we start them on their first day, and I let them know that if that's not something that you want to be participating in, that's okay. You can easily just opt yourself out. And not forcing folks, because when you force them, they're going to get resentful, right? And that's when you're going to have those awkward interactions that you do have to monitor. Let people be themselves. If you have a quiet introvert who just wants to do their job and then leave, that's okay. Let them be that, because they're going to be a happier employee if you let them. They're actually going to be less engaged and less content in their job if you're forcing these things on them. So don't force it. Let it happen, and let those people self-select out when it's not necessary to their job. I think that's okay.
One question one thing that has come up, a lot of people have teams. Do you know of an equivalent to Donut for Teams, or?
I don't off the top of my head, but I bet now that you know the name, you could probably search for it. And I would say if there's not an option yet, that I would guess that it's coming soon. But also, again, using that concept of finding a way to link people, whether it's just a coffee pool where you just draw names out of a hat, you use a Microsoft Excel random number generator to connect people. If it's something that they're interested in, it's probably not too difficult to manage if you're a smaller company, if you don't have something like that. But what we've tended to see is when an app comes out for Slack, some sort of equivalent tends to come out for other things if they don't release it for other apps as well. Right now, I know it's only on Slack, but my assumption is there's probably something very similar. But if you do Donut alternatives, I think you'll probably get some hits.
All right.
Apologize. I should have prepped for that earlier and had a couple alternatives ready to go.
No worries. All right. I think we've got.
So we've got one more tool to chat about. And this is a tool that is probably more intense than some of the others. So I will say that, and it is for professional as well as just personal engagement reasons. We use a tool called 15.5. This tool manages employee engagement and performance as well as goal setting. It's an OKR tool. So for those of you who don't know, objectives and key results are a way of managing goals as a company, as a team, and as a person, and how you can measure them in a reasonable way. This tool is intended for that, but we've actually used it more as an engagement tool unintentionally. So 15.5 does two things with engagement that I think are really crucial, that are things that, again, you don't necessarily need the tool for, but it does help facilitate. And the first thing is tracking one-on-ones with your employees. And the first thing I'll say is, if you're not having regular one-on-ones with your employees in a pandemic world and checking in with them at least on an every other week basis, you probably should. I have check-ins with my employees every single week, including team meetings and group sessions, and some of them are very short, but acknowledging that people need managerial and HR support more than ever. We know that. Really making sure that one-on-ones are a priority, even if they end up not going the full time, and even if they end up just being 15 or 20 minutes of you connecting with your employee, is just a really important thing right now. 15.5 allows you to track your one-on-ones, to add talking points before the one-on-one happens. So, you're going through your inbox and you say, oh my gosh, I need to talk to so-and-so about that. You can add it as a talking point to your one-on-one so you don't forget. It doesn't fall off your radar. And you don't have to try to manage your notes section in your whatever file you use to keep notes. It allows both parties in the tool to take notes that are shared with the other person, and it also allows opportunities for private notes. So if you as a manager can take some notes that are private, you can do that there as well. And it allows you to assign action items. So I know one of the worries of a remote world is, what are my employees doing all day? Well, we can assign them action items here to make sure that they're doing some output, that things are happening that you need them to do. The other piece of 15.5 that is something, again, if you're not using the tool, I think you could probably find an alternative for, is we do a weekly check-in with employees. And that's where the name 15.5 comes from, is employees should spend about 15 minutes a week reflecting on what they did. And they fill out this prompted check-ins. How are you feeling this week? 1 out of 5. How, what's going on with you? What are your priorities? What were the big wins of your week? What were the roadblocks of your week? And it allows you as a manager to see what's happened over the course of the week for that employee in a very meaningful way that the employee has put together for you. And as a manager, it should take you about 5 minutes to review that per person. And you can see a trajectory over time. So let's say you have an employee who's usually, they rate their feelings as a 4 or 5 every week, right? We have those bubbly folks that are always in a great mood. And suddenly for 3 weeks in a row, they've marked it as a 1 or a 2. Now you have an employee who is unhappy, they're disengaged, something is going on. So you have the opportunity then to say, okay, let's sit down and talk about, are you okay? What's going on? Do you have roadblocks that I can help you with? Where are areas where we can work together to get you feeling like you want to again, and to really focus on that? It's an opportunity for really just checking in with folks and making sure that their output is there, right? Because it allows you to say, what were your big accomplishments this week? What did you do? Without saying, what did you do this week? Because we all know that that's a question, and allows you as a manager to give feedback on those things that happened as well. But again, you could probably create an Excel spreadsheet with that, or a survey, or a Google form that does the exact same thing. And I would highly recommend a weekly check-in with employees. It's a really great way.
I have a question around, this is Mental Health Awareness Month. So
Yes.
I feel like I've got to ask this around this tool. Have you found, obviously it's good for engaging them around things that are maybe on their plate in terms of work, but have you found it's kind of or have you had managers report that it's kind of a useful tool in monitoring well-being as well?
Yes. We've had multiple people who, they have an employee where they're like, hey, Rebecca, I have a question. This person used to be all 5s all the time, and now they're 1s every week. What can we do? and finding those roadblocks. And it allows for an open discussion with the employee because they've given you that information, right? They've told you how they felt. They were honest about it. And so you can say, hey, I noticed this. Is there something that we can do together to get you in that right path? And, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's nothing that you as an employer can control. But if you know that's where your employee is, and you know that they're struggling, you can find ways to keep them engaged in a way that makes sense for you and for them and for their role without pushing too hard either. And again, just giving you that pulse of your employees' wellness. Are they okay? Because so many of us are not okay. and that's got to be okay right now. But acknowledging it and having it be part of the conversation instead of the elephant in the room can be a really meaningful step to build trust with your employee, to say, hey, I noticed this. Let's talk about it in an open way.
So do you all require 15.5? That's one of the questions that came in from.
I require it to some extent. The check-ins are not required. They are highly recommended. But we do require folks to work with their team on goal setting to create manageable ways to track output and to track their goals to make sure that we're on track for things. But there's not necessarily a mandatory piece for those check-ins or for those one-on-ones. It's another optional tool for those folks that really want to keep engaged.
All right. Yeah, looks like we're ready to. All right. I'll step out of you.
Perfect. So we're coming up at the end. So we'll go over some quick best practices and then get to the questions that we didn't get to. So all of this to say, there are ways to keep your employees engaged with each other. We talked a lot about the peer-to-peer pieces. But in addition to that, obviously, we want to make sure that we as companies are focusing on how we are keeping people engaged and how that is coming from managers and from HR and from leadership. And how do we ensure that people are doing work when they're remote and trusting that they're not abusing the system and like watching Netflix all day in the corner? Because I know that's everybody's concern, right? We want to make sure we're giving people trust, but that they're not abusing it. Find a model of reviews that works for you that keeps people engaged. We use OKRs, objectives and key results. Maybe you use KPIs, maybe you just have a regular review system, whatever that looks like, to keep people on track to longer term goals. Make sure you're actually doing it, right? Don't just say, oh, we've set this company objective and it's some pipe dream that's impossible with no metrics. If you give people metrics that are measurable, you can tell if they're doing their jobs. We don't need to monitor if somebody's rear is in a seat if we know that they've met some goals. If they've met their goals for the week, they're on track to succeed, we know that they're doing something. Maybe they need a little bit more work. Maybe there's more we can give them, but it's not like they're slacking on their output. Making sure that people are regularly having one-on-ones with their manager, their supervisor, their lead, someone is keeping up with our employees. And if you're going to have, regular one-on-ones, I always say as a manager, I never cancel a one-on-one. Unless both parties are out of the office for like a whole week or more, because we have weekly one-on-ones. If somebody's out for the day, I reschedule. If I'm out for the day, I reschedule, but I never cancel. Even if there's no talking points, I want to make sure I'm connecting with my employees and they know that they can come to me if they have roadblocks and that I'm never going to cancel on them. I think that's a really crucial thing that may be forgotten because I know people they're tired of the Zoom meetings, but regular one-on-ones are really going to keep you engaged with your employees. We also allow our managers to reward people with spot bonuses. So we have our peer-to-peer pool, but we also have a spot bonus pool where managers can reward people in real time for things where they go above and beyond as a manager to a direct report. And obviously not everybody's allowed to do that or can do that. So finding ways for managers to be able to give their employees feedback that's really positive in real time is really helpful, and focusing on how that can happen quickly because we don't want people to slowly disengage. And kind of as all of this is encompassing, we're looking at all of these things and how it's related to remote work specifically and how the fear comes up of how do I know people are doing things. Create ways to track the work. track the output. Don't track the human, because when you start to track the human, you erode the trust. All the things we've talked about are thanking people for doing things. There's always a thing related. There's an output there. Thanking and encouraging and connecting in a way that is measurable, and not just, turning somebody's camera on every 30 minutes to make sure they're working and they're at their desk. Because employees are not responding well to that. People do not want to be monitored in their home. But if they're tracking on outputs and goals, and you can see that they're doing things for their coworkers that are being thanked in a public space, you have people that are doing something and you're able to track that output. So all that being said, there's some Q&A here. I think there's some duplicate questions. So what do we got?
So folks did want to know, how do the digital gift cards work from a company tax perspective?
Yes. We absolutely encourage everybody who's going to do gift cards to track them, to tax them appropriately. We have two methods of doing that. If somebody is rewarded a spot bonus, we actually track it as a non-payable taxable item on the employee's next paycheck. So we let them know, like, hey, you're going to see this. You're going to see taxes, but you're not going to see that paycheck because it came as a gift card. And for those $10 thank yous and for the smaller gifts, we actually do a gross up, and we as a company pay the taxes on those. So what we do is we have a gross up calculator in Namely based on the person. So we enter that person's gift card information, and we actually process an off-cycle payroll that's non-payable. And so what happens is there are grossed up, so they're getting the additional amount, right? The total amount, and then they're seeing that final net amount as the gift cards that they received. And we as a company are assuming all the taxes on that. We actually don't push that to the employees. We take care of the taxes on that because we feel like we should. You don't have to. You can do the non-payable taxable for everything, and we do it on a monthly basis. We pull a report out of Rewards Genius and we link it to payroll so that we're always reporting, that we're always up to date on anything anybody's ever received in a gift.
Looking back at the 15.5 tool, so does that plug in with Namely as well? And does what goes on in there, does that kind of get put into the employee's sort of overall record?
It does pull certain data. So when I set somebody up in Namely, it automatically pulls their manager, their reporting structure, their title, their team into 15.5. It doesn't pull anything else specifically, but I, as an administrator of the tool, can pull some data to track metrics. I can pull people's, pulse surveys, right? Survey questions. What I can't pull, and I do think this is part of employee trust, is I can't see data for anybody else's one-on-ones. I can only see my own, and that goes with any administrator. And I can only see data that people have automatically shared. So we do have it so where our employees' goals are actually public. And so you can see if people are tracking on their goals, and it holds people accountable. But any sort of one-on-one notes or personally held meetings or things like that, those are private to protect employee trust and protection there. So we don't pull it into Namely, but we do have ways to pull data out of that system for monitoring performance and tracking if people are on track for their goals.
All right, excellent. So I think we've answered all these questions today. This has been pretty good.
Oh, there's one more that I'll answer because it's quick.
Okay.
It says, do you use another system for employee performance reviews? I do not, because we actually don't do annual performance reviews. We do a continuous feedback cycle. So we don't have a performance review system, though I do know that 15.5 and Namely both have options for employee reviews. We just don't use them.
Okay.
We find that people were really excited about not having to do an annual performance review. So continuous feedback model it is.
Yeah, they can go both ways, right? So, all right. Well, with all that said, I think we're with less than 2 minutes left, so we're approaching time anyhow. So this was perfect timing. But I want to thank you for joining us today, Rebecca. This was a really good conversation. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. And I know I believe we're going to share the slides, and feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Or you can also email me if you have specific questions on anything that we didn't get to today. I'm happy to help.
And also, just something to keep in mind, at the bottom of your screen, you'll see your resources box. There is a tech demo that I recorded with some folks from Tango Card. So it kind of talks about that rewards gateway feature a little bit more. I do encourage you to download that, check that out. There's a link to it. It's on the HR Exchange Network website. Members, you can watch it for just log in. And so with that in mind, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And I hope that you enjoyed this session. Do keep an eye on the HR Exchange Network, as always, for more content just like this developed to keep you, the HR professional, at the forefront of change. And I will see you next time. Stay safe.
Thanks, everybody.